in an online environment like this is going to be disastrous. And you have already been exposed to 1.5 hours of online instruction. And now, if I repeat the same thing, it is going to be difficult for us to maintain attention. So, therefore, what I have decided is I have decided to go slightly different. I first I want to just do a setting so that I can, apart from seeing my own screen, I should be able to also see. Okay, I wanted to have a situation where I can see the screen and I can see the presentation.
I think I think we have lost Professor Pant's voice because he might have no I he's not muted. I think what has happened is that he has logged out.
Sir, I think sir has muted his
Oh, okay.
microphone.
Acha, he rejoined and then he rejoined as
Yeah,
muted.
I'm joining again because
Okay.
I know this can happen. So I'm just joining again,
Okay.
and I am sharing my entire screen because I will be doing some demonstrations of software if time permits. Okay. So is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is what I will cover. Many of these things you may already know, you may have already heard, but I'm going to repeat them because I think more important for you is to appreciate how different people look at the same aspect in different manners. So we will look at the introduction to optimization, we will look at problem formulation, then we will see how we can classify the problems into various types, a couple of slides on historical perspectives, and then in the end, I'm going to talk to you about classical optimization techniques and then how they are different from the non-traditional or the evolutionary optimization.
Professor Pant,
So,
are you writing something on the screen?
no, I'm not writing
Okay.
anything on the
Okay.
screen.
Okay. 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 Because it
Why are you getting something like that?
I got a comment that all we are seeing is a white screen, so maybe you are writing something and we are not able to see
No,
you.
no, no, no. Then
Okay.
I think it is not working. So
Oh,
then I
okay.
think I need to just check.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and share again. Actually, I was um, okay. Maybe this will work. Just a window. Will this work? Is this working?
Yes. Yes,
Yes,
it is.
sir.
Yes. So this is the layout, okay, which I just spoke to you. So what exactly is optimization? Now let us make it a little bit interactive, friends. We have already spent so much time. Can someone can someone start the discussion? What exactly is optimization? How would you define this particular field? So anybody can unmute and start speaking.
So finding the best solution from feasible space.
Very good. Very well captured. First of all, you have used two important words. One is the best solution, and the other one is feasible space. Great. So that's a very good beginning. So,
Sir,
but the best is,
may I
yeah,
interrupt? Is it possible
yes.
for you to close, because I see full screen is not viable, but can you close some side, because some of the one of the participants is commenting that can we make it full screen? So full screen I think will disrupt the whole process. But could we maybe close one of the annotation the section, if we can close it will become
But
a
I
little
am
bit.
not doing anything. Wait
Okay.
a minute. I am not doing anything. I am just showing my presentation.
Yes, yes, yes. No, I mean, what? So the comment is that, is it? Can we make it full screen? Is it possible for us to make that presentation
So
full
I made
screen?
it full screen.
Oh,
I'll try
okay,
once again.
Mm,
okay.
I'll try
So we
once
can
again.
zoom to get a better view.
Yes, yes. That is what
No,
I was
no. I
suggesting.
wait a minute. I What I will do is I will make it full screen.
Ha,
Now
now
is
it's
it full?
Now it's
yes.
yeah, now it's working.
Now it's full screen.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
fine.
Thank you.
So basically, our job is to identify the best, and the best is in italics because best can vary. So we need to decide the use. So when you do optimization, remember there are two different people who are into play. There is a user and there is an optimization expert, and there is a conversation between them. So who decides what is the best? It is the user. The optimization expert or the optimizer as a person has to be told that something is best. Okay. Now the best is always with respect to some criteria or criterion or criteria. It could be one, it could be many. It has to meet all the limitations, all the constraints which have been imposed. And generally optimization is used for resource maximization. So it should consume the least number of resources. That is the practical aspect of optimization. Is there something I am missing in this regarding optimization, which you think should be added to this definition? Or is this definition complete? What do you feel?
Sir, objective function with either maximization or minimization problem.
Right. So you are now talking the language of the optimizer. I am asking you, is this enough as a overall definition of optimization process, or is something missing?
Sir, constraints.
That is the meaning of all limitations. See, you are trying to use the language of the optimizer expert, whereas I am trying to give the problem in simple language. So from the user point of view, is there something missing in this which needs to be added? Think like a user, not like an optimization expert. Is something missing or something not missing?
Sir, resources we have.
No, I'll repeat my question. From the point of view of the user of optimization, is anything missing in the definition of optimization? Do you want something else apart from this when you optimize as a user? Probably not. Probably this completes. So there are many examples from real life of optimization. For example, every day we use Google Maps to travel from A to B. And there are multiple routes available. Correct? So in Google Maps, you get the route. So what is the basis of getting the route? How does Google Map decide which route to show you?
So the nearest route.
Shortest possible path.
So that means shortest path, which means Google Maps by default is using the shortest distance as the objective function. But is shortest distance always the most optimal solution for the user?
No, sir.
Okay, so that's why.
It is having hurdles, and longer path will be more feasible and optimal.
Exactly. So therefore, criteria can change, and with that, the solution can change. Okay. Similarly, when you book a flight going from Chandigarh to Delhi, for example, C to D, okay, you use online booking portals, right? So do you know there are many options available for you? What are the options available to you when you book flight on an online portal?
So various flights, their timing, various companies offering their other rates, the schedule means sometimes like if you want to go from Raipur to Bangalore, then there will be breakage in Hyderabad, from Hyderabad to Bangalore, like this type of all things the portal shows.
Correct. What you are telling is called as explaining or presenting to the customer the entire feasible space. Okay. That to go from Raipur to Bangalore, these are the various routes possible. Correct? But how do you optimize? Or what options are available when you are optimizing?
So one can be ticket price and time
Right.
of journey.
So therefore, Naman, price is one consideration. So you can select, okay, I want the cheapest flight, which may not be the shortest. It may actually take more time because they may make you go via Delhi and then come to the destination. From Raipur, you may be asked to go to Delhi, and from Delhi to Bangalore, and that may be cheaper, right? That is one. What else?
So time, the
Duration.
shortest time.
Shortest time. So if you don't care about the money, then you can say shortest time, that will be a direct flight if available. Like that, there are many options available. So here is an example. If you ask, so I come from IIT Bombay. So we are living on the campus. Okay. So suppose you ask Google that from a place called Chrysil House, or from my location in IIT Bombay, that is A, I want to go to Chrysil House. The best route will be shown by Google Maps, but this is not the only route, okay? Because on this route, on this road called as JVLR, which is shown in the inclined line in the figure somewhere here, there can be massive traffic congestion, okay? And there is a traffic light here. So it might be better to just go out of it and go this way and this way and this way and this way like that, and then come from there, right? So Google Maps has to be told. So let's look at the vocabulary of optimization so that we can understand how a problem is professionally formulated. So if you look at the problem statement, the first thing you have to do is you have to find a vector x consisting of some n elements, where each of these n is called as a design variable. Correct? Now, if these variables do not have any upper or lower limit, that means if these x1, x2, x3 up to xn, they can take any numerical value from minus infinity to plus infinity, then we call it as a unconstrained optimization problem, especially if there are no other explicit constraints specified. But generally in life, there are going to be some bounds on the variables. There will be an upper bound, there will be a lower bound, shown here by ui and li. Okay, and all the n design variables, they will generally have some upper and lower limits. And this is what happens in the real life optimization problem. Okay. Now, given that I have to find a combination of x1 to xn, each of them within their upper and lower limits, what do I have to do? How do I find the combination? Because there can be infinite combinations. So we need to have some objective. So here the objective is minimize fx. Okay. So fx is called as the objective function. Right? Then you can have some constraints. So what are constraints? Constraints are functions of some or all of the design variables which put a limit. And Professor Chevre showed you so many linear constraints in the previous hour. But of course they need not be linear. They can be any nature depending on the complex relationship between the variables. Okay. So generally in the language of optimization, we consider that there would be typically some m inequality constraints, which are normally shown as gjx less than or equal to 0, where j goes from 1, 2, 3 to n. Now tell me, please tell me, is there any constraint on the value of m for a typical optimization problem? Is there a link between n and m? N is number of design variables, m is the number of inequality constraints. Is there any limit? So does m have to be equal to n, more than n, less than n? What do you think?
So someone write in the chat box.
Yeah, so I'm
As
sorry,
n.
I cannot see anything except the screen. That is my problem. I cannot see chat box, I cannot see your faces, I can only see the screen. So someone has to read out to me, please. And why don't you just speak? Because I cannot see the chat box.
He's saying n greater than m.
N greater than m. So why is there anybody else can answer why should be n more than m?
Because the design variables should always be greater than an equality constant. Because if the design variables will be greater, then only you will have the choices what you should consider and what you should not.
No, first of all, you use the word equality constraint, and this is inequality constraint. Second thing is,
I told inequality constant.
I want to understand why should n be more than m? What happens if n is equal to m? What happens if n is equal to m?
They will be non-basic variables.
No, that is only in linear programming. So do not use the logic of LP in all optimization problems. Okay. So what you heard is only true for linear programming. Suppose, so there can be, why can't I have 10 design variables and 10,000 constraints? What is the problem? The problem is that it might be possible to use these m constraints to eliminate each of the variables, and then finally you will not have any optimization problem. You have only one solution. But I'm just saying it may be possible, because it may not be possible. It depends on how explicitly these the constraints are mentioned. Similarly, there can be in general p equality constraints. Okay. Now tell me, between p and n, is there any relationship? Actually, again, it might be possible that when you use p constraints, you might actually be able to eliminate n minus p variables using that. Okay. And also remember that the function fx, it could be a multi-criteria problem. So it need not be just one function of x. It can be many functions of x. So if you understand this particular slide completely, at least you are with me in the language of optimization. So I think before going ahead, I would like to know if any clarification is required regarding what you are seeing. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that whatever you see in bold font, the X, for example, is in bold font. That means it's a vector. So are there any queries regarding the optimization problem statement? If there are no queries, just say no, we'll go ahead. We'll not waste time. See, remember what Professor Chevre said is that we just cannot continue unless you cooperate and unless you interact. So I will keep on showing this slide till 12:30 in case nobody responds, and it is nobody will be, you will be the person who will lose.
Sir, understood, sir?
Thank you so much. So there are three basic steps in problem formulation. Let us understand what these steps are. The first step is that you as a user have to identify the design variables. What are the design variables, or DVs for short? They are set of variables that describe the system. This is your job. Their values, when combined together, they represent a possible solution. That solution could be feasible or infeasible, but it is a possible solution. And it is always desirable that none of the design variables should depend on some other design variable. They should be independent of each other, because otherwise you will see some interdependencies, and then some variables will become completely redundant. Okay. But I am saying preferably there can be a scenario where some design variable depends on the other, but the relationship between them may be very complex and you may not know about it. But if, for example, x2 is equal to x3 plus 1, then better not to put x3 as a variable, because that doesn't help. The next step is to identify the objective function or objective functions. As I mentioned to you, these are criteria or criterion. If it is only one, for comparison of various design solutions. The optimization algorithm has no choice but to look at the numerical value of the objective function or objective functions to decide which of them is better than the previous one, because only if the objective function value is better, the optimization algorithm can decide that this is a better solution. It is blind to everything else. Secondly, the objective function should definitely be a function of the design variables. Okay, but I want to ask you a question: is it necessary that the objective function should be function of all design variables, or only few is acceptable? Is it required that the objective function should be a function of all design variables? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think it should be a function of all design variables.
Why should it be?
Because it is the design variables which serve as the parameter of the problem, which like we are minimizing certain thing or we are maximizing, like we are finding a best compromise out of these things.
Correct. So is objective function the only parameter in optimization?
No, I don't think, because it's like we are talking about how much resources and other things we have, but
No,
if
just
we
answer
talk
my
about,
question. Just answer my question. Is objective function the only thing that matters in optimization? Is there some other function which matters?
no, it is not the only thing that matters.
What is the other thing?
Like we have constraint
Correct.
equations.
Correct. So what is the problem if x1, x2, x3 affect the constraints and x4, x5, x6 affects the objective function? What is the problem?
Can you repeat, please?
x1, x2, x3 are three variables that affect
Yes,
only
yes.
the constraints,
Okay.
and x4, x5, x6 are the only variables which affect the objective function. So then, is there a problem? Is it an incorrect? Is it an incorrect problem?
Yes, sir, there will be a problem.
What will be the problem?
Sir, constraint will definitely affect objective function.
Not necessary. Constraint is a function which is, by the way, somebody has put the audio on. I'm hearing my own voice. Yeah, better. So basically, constraint is a function that is completely independent of the objective function. It need not be related, no? You can say that I want to minimize the cost of an aircraft and such that the landing distance is less than 1,000 meters. What is the connection between cost and landing distance? But it is possible that some of the design variables affect the constraint and some of them affect the objective function only, but both are important. Therefore, the set of design variables can be so what you can say is that the set of design variables should definitely be a function of either the constraints or the objective function or both. But you cannot insist that they should be dependent only on design variables. Is this point clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Similarly, the next important thing is design constraints. That is limitations on values of parameters. Okay, they have to be also expressed in terms of some design variables. They may not be all, and they could be inequality or equality. So now I want to know, is there anything not clear between design variables, objective function, and design constraints? Then we can go ahead. And we are going to use these short forms, DV, OF, DC. Okay, I hope the 3 steps are clear. Once again, I want to know who is going to do this work. Is it the user or the optimizer? Who will decide these?
Sir, constraint will be decided by user.
Okay, what about objective function?
Objective function can be decision of both.
No. How will the optimizer know? That is your headache, no? Remember, there are 2 people who are interacting here. So, for example, let us assume that you are the users and I am the optimization expert. How do I know what is your objective function? You have to tell me, right? The optimization expert does not know what is your objective function. For you, when you fly from A to B, it could be cost. For him, when you fly from A to B, it could be time. How do I know? So you have to tell me. So now please tell me who does this work.
Sir, all these 3 steps will be decided by user, and the optimizer will be deciding maximization or minimization of the objective function.
I'm sorry. When you look for a solution in Google Maps, does Google decide whether you would like to have minimum cost or minimum time, or you tell Google?
So user tells.
So everything is to be done by the user. The user must identify design variables. The user must identify upper and lower limits. The user must identify objective function or functions. The user must say minimum or maximum, and the user must also say what are the constraints. Okay, so up to this point, nothing is to be done by the optimizer. It is all in the domain of the user. After this work is done, the user is now going to say, I am going to be now away. Now you take over and give me a solution. So what does the user ask the optimizer? Please tell me the combination of design variables within the upper and lower limits, which will maximize or minimize this function or these functions, subject to the constraint that these constraints should be met. Okay. After that, only the work of the optimizer starts. Why have I spent so much time in explaining you this? Because many people come to the expert and say, solve my problem. But unless you do this homework, nobody can solve your problem. Is this point clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you formulate a problem, you actually do 5 steps. And these steps are actually what I told you. So we already know this. You define a problem, you collect the data regarding the problem, you identify variables, constraints, and the objective function. Okay. So let us look at some introductory concepts. You all know that you can use maximization and minimization. So if you want to minimize something, the mirror of that can be maximized. In most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases. Similarly, if you multiply or add a constant to the objective function, the optimum solution does not change. For example, you have a function fx, and then you have something called as cfx, which is fx plus something. The nature of the curve may change, but the optimum will not change. Is this also clear to you? Multiplying the objective function with a constant or adding a constant to the objective function does not change the optimum solution, but it may change the value of the optimum solution. But the solution, which is x star, will remain the same. All right. This is what Professor Shiver already explained to you. I'm going to spend a little bit time here, but you all know about it, right? So there are different names given to it: side constraint, behavior constraint, etc., etc. So basically, you can just understand that all the constraints in the landscape of the objective function in design variables space, they create a domain which becomes feasible. And now you want to find the solution which is within the feasible domain. So, if the constraints are imposed like this, then where is going to be the optimum solution? It can be anywhere inside the feasible region. Okay, but if I do what is called a linear programming that Professor Chevrolet just now explained to you, then he mentioned something interesting to you. What was that? Something that is unique to linear programming about the location of the optimum solution. So if you have listened to him carefully and if you have really understood how simplex works, then you should be able to answer this question. Is my question clear or not clear? I'm waiting for your answer, friends.
The simplex method tries to look at the corner points, assumes that optimal solution will be at the extreme corners of the feasible region.
So is it an assumption, my friend? Or is it the reality?
Yeah, it's a reality. We'll try to take and then work out on the problem.
No. I would like to counter your argument. I would like to say that if the problem is a complete linear programming problem, then there is no assumption. There is a mathematical proof available which shows that if the constraints are properly posed, the solution will lie only on the constraint boundary. Any of the intersections will be the optimal solution. But that is only true for linear programming. In case of and this one very, very useful rule is the basic reason why simplex is working. Because in simplex, what you do is you simply go to the junction of two constraints and then you flip them to see at some other constraint, and that's what you keep doing. But you cannot do the same thing for a problem where you have non-linear. Even if one constraint is non-linear, the game is up. You cannot be sure of that. Okay. Of course, in a very well-posed problems, generally the solution will lie along the constraint boundary, but it can also lie on any of the constraints. So like, for example, Professor Chevrolet also showed that it is possible for you to have any solution acceptable along a line, not necessarily a point. Okay. But let's go ahead. Also, you have to see that there is something called as the contours of objective function. So all the points in the design space which correspond to the same value of the objective function, in case here we have shown this value as C1 or C2 or C3, etc. And generally C1 is less than C2, C2 is less than C3 because we are generally minimizing. So essentially when you draw a contour and which has got a locus of all the points having the same value, that is called as the contour of the objective function. And on that contour space, if you impose or if you plot all the constraints, then you can identify where is the optimum solution. Okay, let's go ahead. So there are many ways in which the optimization problems can be classified. Okay, now I have to also look at the time because we started late and it's already 11:20. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just skip this portion because classification is not really very
Professor,
important.
Professor Pant, we have kind of a longish break from 12 to 2. So if you exceed by 15 minutes, it's okay.
Okay, so if that is the case, then I will go ahead. I thought that we were to manage. So, okay, then I'll just go ahead with the classification because this is something that many people don't know. So, why do we want to classify? We want to classify because when you classify a problem into a particular category, then it becomes easy for you to understand and solve the problem. And also, there are special methods available for particular class of problems. A very good example of that is what Professor Chevre has just exposed you. If you are sure that all the objective functions, all the constraints are linear, then you will be able to say that this is called as a linear programming problem or a LP. And then simplex is one of the fastest and the most appropriate method for LP. So you can try to solve this problem using a non-LP algorithm also. You will get the solution, but it will take much more time and effort. So that is the beauty of classification. Okay. Now, how do you classify? There can be many ways of classifying. You could classify a problem as constraint problem or an unconstrained problem depending on the existence of constraints. So can you think of any problem in real life where there are no constraints? Is it possible to have a problem in real life which has got no constraints? Think about it and tell me. Or is it that all real life problems definitely have constraints?
Sir, it will be definitely having constraints.
Why do you say that? What is the basis?
Sir, because we are surrounded by the things that are not in which we cannot find out the exact values, where the things are some fuzzy in nature, and we cannot have the exact environment.
No, but you are bringing in fuzzy logic and fuzzy. I'm not talking about fuzzy or non-fuzzy. I'm talking about a simple problem in real life where there are no constraints. Is it not possible to have an unconstrained problem? Why not?
So because we are surrounded by environment, and an environmental constant will definitely be there.
No, that is your assumption. That is an assumption. I'll show you a problem that every day is solved by us, which is unconstrained, and we solve it, but we don't know about it because we don't bother to pay attention. So I'll talk about it, okay, in the next slide. Next way of classification is nature of design variables. So what can you say? Design variables, they can be complex variables, they can be positive only, or they can be positive and negative. Okay, they can be discrete or continuous, right? So what is the constraint? What is the limitation of linear programming about design variables? Professor Chevre mentioned it if you had listened carefully. What is not possible regarding the value of the variable in linear programming? You have just heard him about an hour ago or less than that. The design variables cannot have a negative value. That is the limitation of linear programming. Nature of equations, whether the equations are linear, non-linear, are they quadratic, non-quadratic. Nature of the objective function, is it fuzzy or is it discrete or is it clear? Number of objective functions, is it one only or many? Design variable values, are they only integer or they can take any value, or are they fixed or are they fuzzy? Okay. So let us look at existence of constraints. So when you do a least square fit between on the data, I'll show you this one. What are the constraints you put here? Suppose red dots correspond to the data that you have got from some experiment. And now you want to fit a linear line between the data. So what do you do? How do you do this? Can somebody answer, please? I will repeat my question. Yeah, what do we do? Yeah, so someone has to read them out for me, please. I'm sorry, I cannot read the comments. No, that is the answer to the previous question. If I give you these 4 red dots which are obtained by experiment, and if I say, please fit a line, how will you do it?
Sir, you have wrote that function for that particular function, we will put that values and then we will try to draw.
Agreed.
The line.
Agreed. So where is the constraint here, madam?
Yes, sir. Sorry. Sir.
Where is the constraint in this problem? I think you only mentioned now that all problems in life are constraint problems. Correct?
No, sir, I didn't mention, but the constraint here will be all the points, maybe all the points we connect, we don't get a linear point. This can be the linear line. This can be constant.
No. What do you mean by that? That statement itself is completely misleading. You have been given these 4
So
red points.
constraint will be the red dots and the line should cross in between these constraints.
No. Red dots are not constraints. Red dots are 4 points which have been given. That is data. Don't confuse. Constraint is an equation. Constraint is a function.
So constraint can be the least error of this line to the point.
That is the objective function, my friend. That is not the constraint. This is an example of a real life problem which is unconstrained. There are no constraints here. No. The 4 red dots are data. They are not constraints. You have been given these 4 dots and you have told, I want a line that is the best fit of a linear approximation between these 4 points. So you do that by minimizing a function called as yi minus axi plus b whole square, where axi plus b is the line's equation and y is the value of the actual curve. So the deviation from the blue line for all these points, that deviation, you take a difference of that and square it. And you minimize that. There are no constraints in this problem. This is a very good example of a real life unconstrained optimization problem. Obviously, generally the case is constrained. Generally it is constrained, but don't think that all problems in life are unconstrained. Even practical problems in real life could be unconstrained. Okay. So generally you have.
Sir, can you give some example of real life where we do not have any constraint?
I am just now showing it. I am showing it to you in front of you. You are not seeing it. Fitting of a linear equation between 4 points, or fitting of a quadratic equation between these points, or fitting of any equation between these points is an unconstrained problem. Curve fitting is an unconstrained real life problem. Shall I go ahead? Or is it still not clear?
Yes, sir, clear, sir.
Okay. Then we will look at what are the values of design variables. So there can be integer programming where design variables take only integer values. Okay, example will be something called as a traveling salesman problem, about which I will talk very briefly. If time permits, I will talk about it. And then you can have mixed integer programming, where some design variables can take only integral values and others will take real values. So I'll give you one example of mixed integer programming. Okay, I work in the field of aircraft design. So I can say I want to minimize the weight of the aircraft, and to minimize the weight of the aircraft, I can have many design variables. One of them could be landing gear type, whether landing gear is fixed or retractable. If the landing gear is retractable, then the design variable value will be 1. If it is fixed, it will be 0. So landing gear type can take only either 0 or 1. You cannot have 0.5. You cannot have half landing gear down, etc. Okay. So this is an example where it is okay. Then integer programming, I will show you a very good example very soon. As opposite to that, you have real value programming, where the design variables can take any numerical value. All design variables are real variables. In general, we have problems which are real value programming problems, and they are easier to solve. But if you have a problem of integer programming, it is difficult to solve. And if you have a mixed integer programming problem, it is very difficult to solve. Okay, it's called as MILP, mixed integer programming, MIP. Generally, the case is the problems are real value programming problems. Okay. Then we can talk about nature of design variables and equations. You can have stochastic programming, where values of some or all design variables are probabilistic in nature. Can you have such a problem in real life, where the design variables themselves are probabilistic in nature? Yes, it can happen. Some variables may not have a fixed value. They may have only a probabilistic value. But what we normally do is called as deterministic programming. Okay. Then you know about linear programming. Professor Chevrier has spent, where all the objective functions and constraints are linear. But you can have also QP, or quadratic programming, where the function is quadratic, objective function is quadratic, and constraints are linear. Okay. Why is it important? Because there are special tools available to solve such problems. Okay, do not use the same tool for every problem. There are dedicated tools available for solving QP and LP. In general, you have NLP, or nonlinear programming, where if the objective function and or the constraint function is a nonlinear function of design variable, then you have what is called as NLP. Now, just one objective function or one constraint being nonlinear is enough. It can spoil the party. There could be 100 constraints. There could be one objective function, but the 100th constraint could be nonlinear. The problem becomes NLP. Then you cannot use LP to solve it. Then we have geometric programming, where objective function or the constraint function or both of them are expressed as polynomials, not polynomials. I'll talk about it. Okay. Then you can have, what is the nature of design variables? Are they parameters or are they static? For example, if you want to work on what is called a static optimization, you will say, find the values of a set of parameters corresponding to the optimum value of a function. This is what we normally do in optimization. Okay. But you can also have what is called as trajectory optimization or dynamic optimization. And I think there is a special lecture on dynamic optimization, where you are supposed to find a set of parameters which are functions of some other parameter corresponding to the optimum value of a third parameter or the objective function. So the parameters are not on its own variables. The parameters are functions of some other parameter. So I'll show you an example of that. So on the left hand side, we have a simple problem in static optimization. We have a beam, and that beam has got depth D, width B, length L. Okay. So L, B, D are the three parameters for the beam, and there is a load P acting at the tip. It's a cantilever beam. So the design variable sets are actually the transpose vector of B and D. That means we want to decide the value of B and the value of D, so that the weight of the beam is minimized. So the weight will be basically the density into B into D into L. Okay, there is a load P acting. but I would like to ensure that the deflection at the tip is below some value, delta max. Okay, so the deflection is lower. Oh, sorry, there is a small mistake here which I am going to correct now because it's like this. Whereas the values of B and D are going to be more than equal to 0. Of course, they can't be 0 because then it means beam doesn't exist. So it should be actually more than 0. Okay. On the other hand side, you have a problem, same problem, but now the parameters B and D are a function of a parameter T, which is as you move from the start of the constraint end of the beam, there is a variation in the non-linear variation in D and in B. So now we have to minimize Fx, which is again the weight of the beam, which will be the constant density rho times integral 0 to L bt dt, such that the deflection at the tip is less than equal to some maximum deflection. So here the variables B and T are not actually variables. They are functions of another function. They depend on a function called T, which is as you go from the length of the beam from 0 to L. So is this differentiation clear to everybody between a static problem and a dynamic optimization problem? In a static problem, the design variables B and D are not depending on anybody else. They have their own individual existence, independent of anything else. But there, on the right hand side, they are depending on a third variable T. So that's why it's called a dynamic optimization problem, because the values of B and D are dynamically changing as we go. Any queries before we go ahead?
No, sir.
All right. This I will not talk much because already Professor Chevrier has spent 1.5 hours explaining to you. I'll go to quadratic programming. This is a very nice problem where the function fx is equal to some constant plus I equal to 1 to n qi xi plus I equal to 1 to n j equal to 1 to n qij xi xj. That means it's a quadratic subject to linear constraints. This particular problem is classified in this manner because there are special methods called as QP for doing this. One standard method is SQP, sequential quadratic programming. Then we have geometric programming. In geometric programming, the objective function and constraints are expressed not as polynomials but polynomials. What is a polynomial? A polynomial is obtained by multiplication of quantities. So if you can express h as equal to a constant ci times x1 power ai1, x2 power ai2, it's a multiplication, not addition, then it's a polynomial. I will skip this because this is a very special case. Then you have nature of objective functions. So if the objective function can be expressed as a sum of n single variable functions, then you have a separable problem. So what can happen is there could be, I'll give you an example of this one. So for example, suppose we have a problem in which there are 6 variables, x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, x6. And there is one constraint. Okay. There is one. So suppose x1 and x2 are affecting only one constraint. x3 and x4 are affecting only one constraint. x5 and x6 are affecting only one constraint. Okay. Or if you can find out that the objective function consists of 3 costs: cost A, cost B, cost C. Okay. Let's say we are minimizing the cost of a system. The system has 3 components, A, B, and C. 2 variables depend on affect A. 3 variables affect B, and 3 variables or 4 variables affect C. But the two variables which affect A don't affect B and C. Okay. If this is the case, then actually the problem is a separable programming problem, because you can individually optimize each of the sub functions and then the optimum solution will be the addition of all these three. So in some cases, it is possible to do that, and then you can use what is called as a separable programming algorithms. Then you can have multi-objective, single objective. Okay. This I have already explained to you. Okay, now I'll spend a couple of minutes on the historical progression of optimization from 18th century, just for your information. So optimization started in 18th century, the classical of the method that we are looking at. Before that, people were using geometry and non-calculus methods to do optimization. Actually, I have a separate lecture on non-calculus based optimization from history. Okay. But the modern algorithms that you are familiar with, they started in 18th century with the contribution of three scientists, Newton, Lagrange, and Cauchy. So because differential calculus was invented, and they are the ones who have given this particular method, then you have calculus of variations. And for that, we have to thank Bernoulli, Euler, Lagrange, and Weierstrass. After that, we had the classical unconstrained optimization called as the Cauchy's method, which we will discuss today. Then when you want to bring in constraints, you use Lagrange multipliers, in which you convert a problem from constrained to unconstrained by adding Lagrange multiplier terms. Okay. Then if you look at 20th century, Danzig won a Nobel Prize for giving the simplex algorithm. Then we had dynamic programming. I'll just keep going. Geometric programming. Then there were Kunteker conditions. Then there were nonlinear programming algorithms from Zortendijk and Rosen. And finally, special algorithms were created by Gomori for integer programming or a cutting plane method, etc., etc. Recent methods are also available. So there are new methods available which have come recently, pretty recently. One of them very popular is genetic algorithms, which has been initiated by Holland but made popular by Goldberg. Then we have simulated annealing, about which I will talk, I think, day after tomorrow, which has been released in mid-80s. Then neural networks also appeared as optimization tools. Then we began with fuzzy optimization, ant colony optimization, particle swarm optimization. And about 10 years ago, a very interesting algorithm called as TLBO, Teaching Learning Based Algorithm, was given by these three Indian researchers. Okay. So after this, there are many more combinations also which are coming. Have you heard of this problem, traveling salesman problem? Does anybody in the audience know about this problem? Okay, only one person has said yes, so I'll quickly go through. So traveling salesman problem is a very interesting problem in what is called as combinatorial optimization, or in which the design variables take a discrete value. Okay, so let us say there are a finite number of cities and the cost of travel between each pair of them is known, generally based on the distance between them, but it could be other reasons also. We have to find the route having the least total cost so that all cities are visited only once and we come back to the starting point. Okay, is the problem clear? You start from a point, travel to certain other given points and come back to the starting point. The condition is you have to cover them only once and you have to cover them with the least total cost, in which the cost of travel from any pair is given to you in advance. Is the problem clear or you need some more clarification?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
So this is one of the most intensely researched problem in computational mathematics, or what is called as combinatorial optimization. There are many applications of this. You have applications in transportation and logistics. For example, the children have to go to school and there is a school bus that picks them up. Okay, so we have to arrange the route in such a manner that all the kids are picked up from various locations, but you don't come back to any point again second time. Similarly, we want to transport farming equipment for soil testing to various points and then come back. We want to schedule drilling of holes on a circuit board using a machine to come back. We want to construct radiation hybrid maps in genome sequencing. There are many examples of TSP. Now, broadly speaking, one of the first solutions of TSP was given in 1954 in USA with 49 variables, and in 2004 it was more than 24,000 variables. So I'll show you these one by one. This information has been taken from this very interesting textbook and a website on the history of TSP. So in 54, there was a problem that all the capitals, states in the USA have to be covered once, except Alaska. And this was solved by Danzig. So in 54, this was supposed to be a very large scale problem. And this is the optimum route. Then Procter & Gamble did a competition of 33 cities in the USA, and they said, please help us to connect these cities. Okay. Then it began spreading, and this problem was solved in Germany with 120 cities. Then in 87, they looked at solving the problem with 666 cities in the world. This is the solution for that. Then they looked at, in Tektronix, they wanted to put nodes on an array. So what route to take? Then there was a bigger array in Bell Laboratories with 7397 nodes. Then there was a bigger problem in the USA covering 13,509 cities. Then there was a bigger problem in Germany covering 15,112 cities. And finally, there was a problem in Sweden connecting 24,978 cities. So the scale of the problem is going up. And you can see that various solutions are available. In all these solutions, you start from one point, go all over and come back at the same point. So this is a very interesting problem in optimization. Now we come to the last part of today's interaction, which is on classical versus evolutionary methods. What are classical methods? Can someone help me by answering quickly? What are classical methods of optimization?
The methods which we have been studying since last 1 hour, 2 hours.
No, you have
these
only studied
methods
one
are-
method, and that is LP. Actually, you have not studied
There
one.
are
Yeah.
there are other methods also which I have heard, like the network problems, and you have said combinatorial optimization and
No, they are
all
not
such.
classical methods. No, they are not
Then-
classical methods.
Gradient based methods.
Yeah.
There
But-
are some
okay, so what is the feature?
gradient-based methods also.
Agree. Gradient based method is the classical method. What is the feature of classical method?
Feature is they are what I know about evolutionary system is they are based upon some natural systems, and classical methods are purely mathematical.
Okay, let me try to explain to you. Basically, classical methods are point by point methods. In classical methods, you start from a point, and that point could be determined randomly, but you start from a point, and then using some logic, you get another point, and then some other logic and the third point. Like that, you go from point to point. Okay, and also to go from a point A to point B, you use a deterministic transition rule, which is generally through a unique mathematical formula, so that whether it is done by Ram or by Shyam, the same route is followed. Whether it is done by Ram in the morning or Ram in the evening, the same route is followed, because the transition rule is absolutely deterministic, using a unique mathematical formula. These are classical methods. There are two basic types. One is called a direct method, where we don't use derivatives, we just do direct. And then there is a method where it is indirect or gradient based, where we use first order or second order derivatives or combinations of these derivatives to improve our search. So let us look at a direct method. One of the most common methods is the Hook and Jeeves pattern search. Okay. So in this particular method, what you do is in the landscape of the function, let us say you are at point number x0, which is the orange circle. This is the starting point. And this is a two-dimensional domain. D1 and D2 are the two dimensions. That means there are only two variables, D1 and D2, and the contour lines are shown in terms of constant values of the objective function. And as you go from the outer ring to the inner ring, the function value is reducing. And the minimum or the optimum solution is marked at a start location. Okay. So what you do is very simple. You are at point number x0. You take one step in this direction, one step in this direction, one step in this direction, and one step in this direction. So where you are, you move up and down, left and right in a two-dimensional problem by some amount, and then take the best of the four. So I was here, I went here, the point is worse. I go here, the point is worse. I go here, the point is worse. I go here, the point is better. Therefore, I stop here. After that, I again go up, the point is better. I go right, the point is worse. I go left, it's where I came from. I go down, it is worse, so I come here. So therefore, in these two steps, I have come from x0 to x1. Again, from x1, I do a pattern search up, right, left, below, and I find that this was better. Then I go right, left, up, down, this is better, so I come here. Then I go to this point. When I come to this point, unfortunately, no improvement, no improvement, no improvement, no improvement. So I'm going to settle down here, or I'm going to reduce my search area. Okay. So that's how you do. You basically keep on moving like this as per the pattern. And finally, you come to the optimum. This is called as a pattern search algorithm. Okay. So in a classical approach, you start from an initial point, you locate a search direction, and you use some algorithm or some logic for the direction. Okay. Mostly we use local information, as I will show you. Then you carry out a one-dimensional search. In that direction, where is my minimum? You go to that point and stop there, and then you ponder. Should I continue or should I stop? Because am I at a point where optimum has already been reached, or is there scope for improvement? If the answer is that no, there is scope for improvement, then you proceed further, otherwise you stop. And you keep on repeating this till you reach the convergence criteria. Okay. Any doubts or any questions regarding a standard classical approach? So each line has actually a question. So how do you start from initial point? How do you get the initial point? Come on, guys. Many of you have done a course on optimization. Many of you have done linear programming. Many of you have done operation research. You must be knowing all this, right? I don't have to repeat it. But still you are not able to interact. What is the problem? No, need not be given. No, destination is never known, sir. Then there is no optimization. If destination is known, then why are you optimizing? Destination is the optimum solution. I don't know it. That's why I'm optimizing. Initial point can be given or it can be taken arbitrarily. Okay. Next question is locating a search direction using some transition rule. What could be the logic? How do you decide a search direction? What basis can you use? So in the previous example which I showed you, I was doing a search in all the directions around the current point, and then I decided to stop at some point. What was the criteria used there? The criteria was improvement in the function value. So similarly, you can decide a search direction as a direction in which there is going to be some improvement. Okay? That is what is used in classical method, and that is their drawback. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But what they do is, they say that I would like the direction to be such that there is some improvement in the objective function. Okay, so once you look at the direction, you say, okay, I want to go in this direction. Then you go, you keep on going till you reach the minimum in that direction. For that, you do a one-dimensional search. And then you check the convergence criteria. Have I exceeded the computational time? Have I exceeded the number of function evaluations? Have I already reached the optimum and there can be no further improvement? If the answer to all any of these is yes, you stop. Otherwise, you go back. Okay. The most common technique was by Cauchy using simple calculus, and that is the gradient of a function, which is basically the first partial derivatives column vector. It's called a del f or dou f by dou x or grad f or just by c in many things. So what is the gradient? Gradient is the direction from any point on the curvature of the function. If you go in that direction, you are going to have maximum increase in the function. Mark my words, you will have maximum increase in the function. Okay, so the gradient vector is always normal to the tangent plane at x star. It is always normal to the tangent plane, and it represents the direction of maximum increase in the objective function value. So if you are at this point number 1, and if you locate the gradient direction, and if you proceed in that direction, you will find that you hit a point where there is maximum local increase. Then at this point, you again start searching. Oh, you will find that direction is different. So you go along the direction 2, and then 3, and then 4. Like that, you keep going till you get the. So this will, you are guaranteed in each iteration maximum improvement. Maximum, not improvement, but increase. Okay. So if you are going to go for minimization, you will go exactly opposite to the gradient direction. So what you do in the steepest descent method, which is the most classical method, is to start at some point P. Let us say the point is xpyp, the starting point. You compute the function fxy at that point P, where the objective function f depends on two variables, x and y in this case. So you calculate the value of f. Then you take a small step in the direction in x. Okay, you take a small step, find f of x plus delta x and y. Okay, and use this step to find the partial derivative of f with respect to x at that point. And if you remember your basic calculus, friends, the partial derivative is equal to nothing but the value of the function at the new point f of x plus delta x and y minus the value at point fxy divided by the step that you have taken. Similarly, find the partial derivative of f with respect to y. So what you do is you calculate the function at any value of x plus y plus delta y minus the value at the previous point xy. I have not mentioned y there, sorry, upon delta y. So with these two, you can construct the gradient vector del f, which is dou f by dou x e1 and dou f by dou 2 e2, where e1 and e2 are the identity or the unit vectors in that direction. And then you can calculate the new values of x and y as the old value minus dou f by dou x, because I want to walk in the direction of opposite of the maximum gradient, divided by the mod of gradient into some step delta, which is determined, and then you keep on moving in that direction till you reach the minimum. Okay, this is the steepest descent method. It has major drawbacks. Number one, the successive directions of this particular method are orthogonal. They are perpendicular to each other. So let us say the optimum is somewhere here, and you start from here. You will go in one direction, hit the optimum, then you will go in the direction orthogonal to that, hit the optimum, then again this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. Okay, so therefore, the iteration history is not utilized. Every time you are going only for local improvement. You have a slow decrease in the cost function after some initial iterations, and it is unsuitable for searching global functions where there could be more than one local minimum. Okay, and also we only use the first order information, the first derivative, in searching the direction. So I'll try to show you the working of this algorithm by a small animated GIF file. So you can see this blue ball is the starting point and there is a valley there. So what it does is it starts, locates the direction, moves, starts, locates the gradient, moves, starts, locates the gradient, move, and then finally it stops there. Okay. In this it seems very easy, but it's very time consuming. Now how do you improve it? By a simple improvement called as a conjugate gradient method. I don't want to give you the mathematical explanation because I know it's tough to understand all these mathematical derivations on an online environment like this, especially just before lunch. But you can consider that it is like a deflected steepest descent method. So what you do is, instead of following the blue lines which are orthogonal to each other or perpendicular to each other, you follow the black lines which use the information from the previous iteration. And that's how you improve the convergence. You reach the solution much better. There is also a method called as a momentum method. In the momentum method, as shown by the purple colored ball here, the blue ball and purple ball both start from the same point. The blue ball is the steepest descent method, and the purple ball is a modification using what is called as a momentum method. In the momentum method, what we do is, apart from the steepest descent direction, we also add a momentum to the function based on the directions that were taken in the previous iteration. And with this, you can see that the ball can jump out of a local minimum and go and probably locate itself in the global minimum. Okay. Then we have Newton's method, which is better than steepest descent because it uses second order derivatives. So it gives you better convergence, and at the cost of more numerical experiment and numerical calculation, it gives you better solutions. But we have seen that it is very, very similar to starting point. If you start at a point near the optimum, you are good, but otherwise you are going to be problematic. Now, I wanted to give you a demo, but already it is 12 and I don't want to go into demo. I will give you a demo when I go to when I give the next class. Okay, I have a Fortran program to give you a demonstration. Okay, I would like to know from Akshay, how much time do I have? So then maybe I'll just quickly go through and show you a demonstration of how the method works. Okay. So we will use this very interesting function called as a Himmelblau function for our demonstration. Himmelblau function is the sum of two squares. So therefore the minimum value will always be equal to 0 because sum of two squares is going to be minimum when individually the values are 0. So if you solve these two equations simultaneously, you will get 4 local minima with the value at 0. One of them is, I am talking about the domain between +6 and -6 only, or +10 and -10 only. So you will find there are 4 local minima. One of them is 3, 2. The other is -2.8, 3.13. The third is, so I would request all of you, please take a picture of this particular slide and keep it with you, because we are going to try steepest descent and we have to ensure that it will end up in any one of these 4. It should not go to any other point. It should go to any one of these 4 points. Okay. So please take a picture of this and keep it with you. Maybe somebody can note it down if you are not having, if you don't want to take a picture, just note down the 4 values. Okay. So here is the graphical plot of the function between -6 to +6 for x1 and x2, or x and y. You can see those 4 blue dots are the 4 local minima of this function. All of them correspond to f equal to 0. Therefore, all of them are equally good or equally desirable. Okay. Any one of them can be acceptable as a solution. Here is an example. Okay, forget about the local maximum. That happens somewhere in the middle. Okay, here is another contour plot. So it shows you that the function undergoes a minima which is equal to 0 at these 4 points and rises up sharply beyond that. So I work in Fortran, so I'm going to show you a small code in Fortran which can give you a solution. So first we will use just standard input files. Okay, so already I have stored some files. So I'll take input from the file, yes. So the file is called as steepesthim.in. It will give the output in a file called .out, and in the logbook we will keep a track of all the points which we have visited. So file names are okay, right? They are okay. So I have got the solution, and the solution. So this is the logbook. So it tells you. Let me also show you the input file. So it's a two-dimensional vector. Are you able to see my screen? I hope so. Can you please confirm? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I wish I can just increase the size of this one. So just give me a minute. I'll try to increase the size. Yeah. Display. Right. I will make it 16. Is it better?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We'll actually make it even a little bit larger than that. So why not make it, say, 25? Okay. So 2 is the number of variables x and y. There is a starting point which is 0.5 and 6 given arbitrarily. The only thing I am limiting here is that it should be between plus and minus 6. Then it asks me for accuracy in steepest descent, accuracy in a golden section search, which is a one-dimensional search. And if you want results, then if you want intermediate results, that means if you want to see how it went, then you have to give 1, otherwise 0. So we have given 1. Okay. So this was this one. Now I'll show you the solution. So let's look at the logbook. Okay. So in the logbook, we began from 0.56, and the value of this. So this is the value of the objective function. 7 to 10 power 2, 700, and there were 5 calculations to reach this point. Then there were 30 calculations to reach this point, which is 13.7. Then 55 calculations to reach 4.96, and it has got stuck at 4.96. Okay, so it has gone to this point minus 3.7758 and minus 3.2796. If I just look at it, and if I just compare, if I just compare it with the, what are the optimum solutions, you will see, you will see that okay, let us see if it is at one of those solutions. Okay, so if I just print it here, you can see this solution is somewhere near the optimum x3 star, 3.779 and 3.283. So yeah, this is somewhere near the optimum solution. Okay, so that is what it is. So it has worked, but how many iterations it took? 5 plus 30 plus, and if you plot these points, 6 and this, you will find that they are going to these. If you plot these points, you will find that they are going to be orthogonal. They are going to be perpendicular to each other. Okay. So we go back to our slideshow. We go back to our code. Yeah. Now, suppose I open the input file, and now I will give this value as, say, 1.0, 6.0, or maybe somebody else can tell me, give me any starting value which is between 6, 6, plus minus 6 and plus minus 6. Can somebody give me from the audience any starting point? Come on, guys. Just speak out some number which I can enter. 2 and 4. So 2.0, comma 4.0. Okay. We can even do these things. Actually, we can even do these things in the code directly by not running. But I'll just run this right now. So it's faster. Yes, from files. Yes. And if I just now look at the output file, logbook again. 1 minute. So if I go back here, let us see the output file. Oh, this is better actually. So here you can see that we started from the point 2, comma 4, and the function value there was 130 approximately. The gradient value was there, function 5. Then we went to this point, then this point, then this point, then this point, etc., etc. Finally, where did we come? In the 8th iteration, we reached a point 2.994 and 2.0024. The function value is 8 10 power minus 5, which is almost 0. Gradient value also is 10 power minus 2, which is almost 0. You can see the gradient was 1.7 e power plus 2, and now it has come to 7.5 e power minus 2. And it has done a total of 226 function evaluations, and the solution is 2.9991 and 2.0008, which is one of the optimum solutions, which is at 3, 2, because we know that this function has 4 minima, and one of them is 3, 2. Okay, so you can see that it is working, but I will show you later on when I come. I'll show you that it doesn't work properly. Okay, then now we look at some methods. So direct methods are ones which are slow to converge, but they need many function evaluations. Gradient based methods are converging faster, but they need less function evaluations. Okay, but they cannot be used for non-differentiable functions. Our function was very simple. It was the sum of 2 squares. Problems are, if you have discrete spaces, you can't handle, you cannot parallelize them, you have a very poor domain exploration, and you are sensitive to the trial point. But the biggest problem with these methods, as I will demonstrate to you when I do the similar running algorithm, is that they get stuck in the local minimum. Okay? So if you want to go for global minimum of a solution, then you cannot use these methods, because if you want to reach the point F from any starting point, the only way is if you start between E and G. Otherwise, you will get stuck in either B or D or H. Okay, so therefore, when you look at non-greedy algorithms, you have to allow it to go uphill once in a while when you are trying to minimize. Okay, but as I will explain to you day after tomorrow in more detail, you need to have the ability to do domain exploration and not getting stuck in the local optimum. So the evolutionary optimization algorithms about which we will speak, they work on population of design. They don't work on only one point. There is a randomness in the search, but it is controlled. And some examples are listed below, out of which I am going to cover one of them called as simulated annealing. Okay. So with that, I come to the end of my session, 1 minute before the allotted time. So I'm open to any questions or any clarification that you may have. And for that, I will stop sharing my screen. Okay, so if you have any questions or queries, you can ask me.
I don't see many questions.
Yeah, the question that they want to ask is, where is the lunch? So that's fine. I have no problem.
Sir, excuse me, sir. You have mentioned in one of the slides that the problem is with poor exploration of design space.
Correct.
So, and one of the problems was also that it is stuck in local minima.
Right.
So are these two things interrelated? Like, is it stuck in local minima because of poor exploration of design space?
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true. Classical methods, they are very greedy. Okay, they want improvement in each iteration. So therefore, they go to the nearest local minimum and then they stop there, because once you are stuck in the local minimum, there is no way to come out, because to come out you need to go against the desired value. Okay, if you are minimizing, you have to go towards the direction of increase in the function if you want to go out of local minimum or local minimum. So therefore, because these methods have very poor domain exploration, I will explain this to you day after tomorrow when I give you a more detailed demonstration of simulated annealing, where I will show you how a simulated annealing algorithm explores the entire domain very beautifully, whereas in the steepest descent, I will show you how it gets stuck. See, today I have shown you the power of steepest descent. I have not shown you its weakness. Next time when I interact with you, I will show its weakness by introducing little bit complexity in the function. Right now, it is going to any of the 4 minima very easily. But if I twist slightly, it will get stuck in the local minimum. And then you will realize it can never come out of it. I will demonstrate that day after tomorrow. So to answer your question,
Okay, thank you, sir.
Both of them are highly interrelated. See, for example, if you look at the algorithm called as steepest descent, when it gets stuck in the local minimum, the gradient is 0 all around. So it will stop. It will not go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thanks a lot. I'm glad that people are still able to listen despite being exposed to 1.5 hours of theoretical talk and then another 1.5 hours of talk. So I admire your patience. And that. Yeah, that is very true. So unless you actually use the whiteboard, but then it is very, very time consuming and you cannot do it in the 90 minutes allotted. See, we are trying to compress the entire 1 semester course into 1 workshop. So definitely we will have to compromise on the understanding. We can't help it. Okay, but yeah, we are available to clarify your doubts via email. So, I will try to share my email address, which you can use to communicate with me. I've just typed my email address in the chat window. So any query you have, please feel free to contact and I'll be happy to run some codes for you also. So you will have more fun on day after tomorrow when I talk to you about simulated annealing, because there I'm going to do a lot of demonstrations like this. And I'm going to involve you in giving the trial points. So you will really enjoy. You have to prove me wrong day after tomorrow when I make some claims. Okay. Okay, I think there are no more questions, so we can all take a break. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Akshay. Thanks.